They poured concrete onto my lake bed like it was theirs, so I shut off the water and watched their entire neighborhood choke. Funny thing is, nobody thought the guy in the beat-up pickup would be the one holding the valve. And by the time they realized it, it was already too late. My name's Caleb Mercer. I'm 43, diesel mechanic out in Greene County. The kind of place where your hands are always a little stained no matter how hard you scrub, and your truck tells more truth about you than your clothes ever will. I've been working the same shop for nearly 20 years, same creaky lift, same coffee pot that tastes like burnt metal, same rhythm every day. And for most of my life, I didn't think I owned anything worth fighting over. Then my uncle passed. Didn't have kids, never married, just lived quiet on the edge of town. And when the paperwork settled, I found out he left me 3 acres of land, with a lake sitting right in the middle of it. Folks around there called it Mercer Lake, though I hadn't heard that name in years, not since I was a kid fishing off the muddy banks with a cane pole and a dented tackle box. I drove out there the first weekend after I got the deed, expecting overgrowth, maybe some trash, nothing unusual, but what I saw instead stopped me halfway down the gravel road. Because my lake wasn't mine anymore. Not the way it looked, anyway. All around it, like someone had built a frame around a picture they didn't own, sat this polished, manicured development called Silverthorne Estates. Big houses, clean white stone, tall windows reflecting sunlight like they were trying to blind the sky, and every driveway curved and smooth, expensive lines leading up to garages bigger than my entire house. And right in the center of all of it was my lake. Except nobody was treating it like it belonged to someone. I remember sitting there in my truck, engine still running, just watching for a minute, people walking dogs along the edge, kids skipping stones, a couple unloading kayaks like they've been doing it for years. No signs, no fences, nothing to say otherwise. Just this quiet, unspoken assumption that it was theirs. I didn't say anything that day. Didn't need to. I figured maybe there was some kind of agreement. Maybe my uncle had worked something out before he passed. So I went home, dug through the paperwork, and started reading. Turns out, there was no agreement. Not a single line giving anyone permission to touch that water. In fact, what I found was the opposite. The original deed dated back to 1949, signed in fading ink, and right there in plain language it said the water rights, all of them, were tied directly to that land. Not shared, not leased, owned, and more importantly, controlled. See, Mercer Lake wasn't fed by some natural spring running wild underground. It came through a controlled inlet, a spillway system built decades ago, tucked into the far corner of the property where most folks wouldn't even notice it unless they knew what they were looking for. A cast iron valve, old, heavy, stubborn, and whoever owned that valve controlled every drop of water in that lake. I sat back in my chair that night, paperwork spread across the table, just staring at that realization like it was something fragile that might disappear if I blinked too hard. Because suddenly, this wasn't just land anymore, it was leverage. Still, I wasn't looking for trouble. Next morning, I drove back out there, parked near the edge, and started walking the perimeter. That's when I noticed something new, something that hadn't been there before. Concrete. Fresh. Gray. Smooth. Still holding that chalky look it gets before it fully settles. And not just a little bit either. I'm talking a full stretch, maybe 30 feet out into what should have been shallow water, forming the base of a structure that was already halfway built. A boathouse. Big one, too. Multiple slips, steel brackets, everything lined up like it belonged in a magazine spread about luxury lake living. And bolted right to one of the support posts was a clean, polished sign that read, "Private access, residents only." I actually laughed when I saw that, not because it was funny, but because it was so bold it almost felt like a joke I wasn't in on. Private. On my land. I walked up closer, crouched down, ran my fingers across the edge of the concrete. Still rough in places, brand new. This wasn't something that had been sitting here for years under some misunderstanding. This was recent, intentional, and nobody had bothered to ask. That's when something shifted in me. Not anger right away, more like a slow tightening, like a bolt being turned just a little too far. Because it's one thing if folks assume, it's another when they act like your ownership doesn't matter at all. I didn't make a scene, didn't confront anyone right then. Instead, I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. Every angle, every detail, the sign, the structure, the shoreline, even the footprints in the mud. Then I drove straight to the county office and requested the latest survey maps. Sat there for over an hour while they pulled the records. And when they laid that map out in front of me, it confirmed everything. The concrete, the structure, all of it, sitting squarely within my property lines. No easement, no permit, nothing. Just built like I didn't exist. I remember the clerk glancing at me, kind of hesitant, like she knew what I was thinking but didn't want to say it out loud. "You planning on filing something?" she asked. I folded the map slowly, slid it back into the envelope, and just shook my head. Not yet, because by then, I already knew what I was going to do. I drove back out there one more time that evening, sun starting to dip low, casting that golden light across the water, and I walked all the way to the far corner where the spillway sat, half hidden under brush and old timber. Took a second to clear it out, get a good look. And there it was. That valve. Same one I remembered as a kid, rusted but solid, like it had been waiting all these years for someone to remember it mattered. I wrapped my hand around it, felt the weight, the resistance. Paused for just a second, not because I was unsure, but because I understood exactly what this meant. Once I turned it, there was no pretending things were fine anymore. No quiet assumptions. No shared illusions. Just consequences. I started turning. Slow at first, metal grinding softly, then louder as it gave way, inch by inch, until finally it locked into place. Closed. And just like that, the clock started ticking. I didn't stick around to watch it happen, not right away. Truth is, I already knew what would follow, didn't need to stand there like some kind of spectator waiting for the first crack to show. Water doesn't argue, doesn't negotiate, it just obeys gravity and whatever controls it. And now, for the first time in decades, that control had a name again. Mine. Next morning I drove out before work. Coffee still too hot to drink, and I could see it before I even parked. The shoreline had shifted. Not dramatically, not yet, but enough. Maybe 5, 6 inches down. The kind of change most people wouldn't notice unless they were looking for it. But I was. The dock posts looked a little taller. The waterline stains, those faint rings left behind over time, started to show like old scars. And the smell, just barely there, that warm, earthy scent of mud waking up under sunlight. I stood there for a minute, hands in my pockets, just taking it in, not smiling, not frowning either. Just watching. By the time I got off work that afternoon, it was more obvious. A foot down, maybe a little more. The edge of the lake had pulled back enough to expose patches of dark, slick mud that hadn't seen air in years. A couple of folks were out there now, standing near the unfinished boathouse, pointing at the water like it had personally offended them. I didn't walk over. Didn't say a word. Day 2. That's when it started getting uncomfortable. The drop was faster now. 12 inches, maybe more. The lake wasn't a lake anymore, not in the way they were used to. It looked sick, like something retreating from itself. Wide stretches of mud spread out along the edges, thick and uneven, with little pockets of trapped water reflecting the sky in broken pieces. And the smell hit harder. That deep, sour rot, the kind that settles in the back of your throat and doesn't leave. I saw one of the residents that day, a guy in running shoes that probably cost more than my rent, standing there with his hands on his hips, just staring like he couldn't process what he was looking at. "Something's wrong with the lake," he said, not even really to me, more like he needed to hear it out loud. I took a sip of my coffee, nodded once. "Yeah, looks like it." He squinted at me, like he was trying to place me, trying to figure out why I wasn't reacting the way he expected. "You live around here?" I shook my head. Not exactly. Didn't elaborate. Didn't need to. By day 3, there was no lake left. Just ground. Cracked, uneven, stretching out where water used to sit like it had always been there. Fish lay scattered in the shallows that weren't shallow anymore, their silver bodies dull under the sun. The boathouse, that big, polished structure, now stood awkward and exposed, its posts sunk into dry earth instead of water, like something misplaced. And that's when they finally came looking for me. I was at the shop, halfway under a rig, when my coworker nudged my boot. "Hey, man, there's some guy out front asking for you." Real fancy type. I wiped my hands, slid out, and walked toward the front, and there he was. Tall, older, dressed like he had somewhere better to be, standing next to a dark sedan that probably cost more than everything I owned combined. His posture alone told me who he was before he even opened his mouth. "You Caleb Mercer?" His voice had that polished edge to it, practiced, controlled. That's me. He stepped closer, looked me up and down for half a second, just enough to make his opinion clear. I'm Victor Langford. I represent the Silverthorne Homeowners Association. Of course he did. He didn't waste time. There seems to be an issue with the lake. I leaned against the counter, folded my arms. Is there? His jaw tightened just a little. The water level has dropped significantly. We've had several complaints. From who? I asked calm. Our residents. I let that sit for a second, then nodded toward the door. You mean the folks living around my lake? That word "my" landed exactly where I wanted it to. He paused, just for a moment, then recovered. There may be some confusion regarding ownership boundaries. No. I cut in, not raising my voice, just steady. There isn't. I reached behind the counter, pulled out the folder I'd brought that morning, copies of the survey, the deed, everything neat and clear. Set it down between us. That concrete structure you've got going up? I tapped the paper. It's on my land. No easement. No permit. No permission. He didn't look at the papers right away. Just kept his eyes on me. Like maybe if he held that stare long enough, the situation would change. That development has been maintaining that lake for years, he said finally. Landscaping, cleaning, general upkeep. Didn't ask you to. It benefits the entire community. I gave a small shrug. Doesn't make it yours. That's when the mask slipped, just a little. This doesn't have to become adversarial, he said, voice tightening. I tilted my head. Already is. Silence stretched between us for a second. Then he exhaled slowly, like he was adjusting strategy. What exactly is it you want, Mr. Mercer? There it was. Not an apology. Not an explanation. A transaction. I thought about that for a moment, not because I didn't know, but because I wanted him to sit in it a little longer. Then I reached into the folder again and pulled out a single sheet. An invoice. I slid it across the counter. Structure removal, I said. 48,000. He glanced down, eyes scanning. Environmental restoration, 23. His brow furrowed. Total comes out to 71,000. He looked back up at me, and this time there was no mask. Are you serious? I met his gaze, didn't blink. Completely. That's absurd. What's absurd? I said, leaning forward just a little, is pouring concrete on land you don't own and acting surprised when there are consequences. His lips pressed into a thin line. You're intentionally draining that lake. I didn't answer right away. Didn't need to. He already knew. This will affect property values. Contracts are already being pulled. Do you have any idea what kind of damage you're causing? I let out a small breath, almost a laugh, but not quite. Yeah, I said quietly. I do. Another pause. Then I added, just enough edge to make it clear. You've got 15 days. He stared at me like he was trying to decide whether I was bluffing, whether this was some kind of negotiation tactic he could outmaneuver. But the thing about people like him, they're used to leverage coming from money, influence, connections, not from a rusted valve in the ground. He picked up the invoice slowly, folded it once. This isn't over. I nodded. No, it's not. He turned, walked out, and just like that, the conversation ended. But the situation? That was just getting started. Because what he didn't realize yet, what none of them did, was that I wasn't done turning the pressure. Not even close. He was right about one thing, it wasn't over. Not even close. Because once something like that starts, once people realize the ground they're standing on isn't as solid as they thought, everything shifts, attitudes, alliances, even the way they look at each other. And over the next few days, that whole neighborhood started to crack in ways that had nothing to do with dried mud. By day 5, the place felt different. Quieter, but not peaceful, more like the kind of quiet that sits on top of tension. I drove out there again just after sunrise, and the lake bed, what used to be water, had turned into this wide, uneven stretch of hardened earth, split with long fractures like it had been pulled apart from the inside. The boathouse stood right in the middle of it all, stiff and useless, like a monument to a bad decision nobody wanted to admit to. And there were people everywhere. Clusters of residents standing in small groups, talking low, some of them pointing toward the structure, others just shaking their heads. You could tell the story was changing depending on who you asked. Some blamed the developer, some blamed the HOA, and a few, the quieter ones, had already figured out the truth but didn't seem too eager to say it out loud. I stayed near the edge, leaning against my truck, just watching. That's when I noticed a woman walking toward me, mid-30s maybe, hair pulled back, not dressed like the others. No designer sunglasses, no polished look, just jeans, boots, and a tired expression like she hadn't slept much. She stopped a few feet away, glanced out at the lake bed, then back at me. "You're Caleb, right?" I nodded. "Yeah. I'm Emily Carter. I live over there." She gestured vaguely toward one of the houses. "Or, I guess I do for now." There was something honest in the way she said that. Not defensive, not entitled. Just real. "You know what's going on here?" she asked. I studied her for a second, then shrugged. "Depends who you ask." She gave a small, humorless smile. "Fair enough." We stood there a moment, both looking out at what used to be water. "They told us everything was approved," she said finally. "The construction, the access, all of it. HOA meetings, documents, votes, it all sounded official." "Yeah," I said quietly. "I'm sure it did." She let out a breath, rubbed her hands together like she was trying to warm them even though the air wasn't cold. "My husband and I just bought in 6 months ago. Most of our savings tied up in that house." She paused, eyes still on the ground. Now the bank's already asking questions. That landed heavier than anything Langford had said. Because this was the part people like him didn't talk about. Not the contracts, not the numbers, the people caught in the middle of decisions they didn't make. "You didn't pour that concrete," I said. "No," she replied, a little sharper than before. "But we're the ones paying for it." I nodded slowly. "Yeah, I know how that goes." She looked at me then, really looked this time. "So what happens now?" I considered that for a moment. Not the legal answer, not the technical one, just the truth. "That depends on your HOA," I said, "and how fast they're willing to admit they messed up." She let out a quiet laugh, shook her head. "That could take a while." "Yeah," I said. "Probably will." We didn't talk much after that. Didn't need to. She walked back toward her house, and I stayed where I was, watching the sun climb higher over a lake that wasn't a lake anymore. By day 8 they caved. Didn't come with apologies. Didn't come with humility either. Just a call from Langford's office asking to discuss resolution terms. Even over the phone, I could hear it in his voice. That edge was gone, replaced with something tighter, controlled in a different way. They knew. We met out by the property that afternoon. He showed up with another man this time. Younger, probably legal counsel, carrying a folder thick enough to make a point. "No need for theatrics today, Mr. Mercer," Langford said as he stepped out of the car. I gave a small nod. "Works for me." We kept it simple. They'd pay the invoice, full amount. $71,000. No negotiations, no delays. In return, I'd reopen the valve once the structure was removed and the lake bed restored to its original condition. He didn't argue, didn't even try, because somewhere between day 1 and day 8, the situation had flipped completely, and he knew it. The work started the next morning. I hired a crew from 2 counties over, guys I trusted to do it right. Big crane, cutting equipment, trucks lined up along the road. And for 2 straight days, that boathouse came apart piece by piece, metal screaming, concrete cracking. Everything they'd built dragged out and loaded up like it never should have been there in the first place. 12 truckloads by the time it was done. And when the dust settled, the lake bed looked like it used to. Raw, open, waiting. Langford handed me the check that afternoon. Didn't say much. Just a tight nod, like he was closing a deal he didn't like but couldn't avoid. I took it, folded it, slipped it into my jacket. Then I handed him something of my own. Another document. He glanced at it, brow tightening as he read. "What is this?" "Easement agreement," I said. "Access rights for your residents. Limited use of the shoreline. 25 properties included." He looked up. "Annual fee? 4,000. His jaw shifted. "And control clauses?" I nodded. "Any future construction goes through me. Water levels too." Silence again. Longer this time. Because this wasn't just about fixing a mistake anymore. This was about who held control moving forward. "You're asking us to pay you indefinitely," he said. "I'm giving you legal access to something you don't own," I replied evenly. "That's how that works." The younger lawyer leaned in, whispered something to him. I didn't catch all of it, but I heard enough. No leverage, clear ownership, recommend compliance. Langford closed his eyes for just a second, then sighed. Just like that. No speech. No last stand. Just a pen moving across paper. I waited until they drove off before I walked back to the spillway. The valve was still there, same as before, quiet, patient. I wrapped my hand around it again, felt that same weight. But this time, it felt different. Not like a warning. More like a decision already made. I turned it. Slow, steady, until the mechanism shifted and water began to move again. Didn't rush back to the lake this time either. I let it happen on its own. By the end of the first week, the water had returned enough to soften the edges. By the second, it looked like a lake again. Clear, calm, reflecting the sky like none of it had ever happened. But it had, and everyone there knew it. Now when people walked along that shoreline, they looked a little closer, talked a little quieter, and every so often, you'd see someone glance toward that far corner where the spillway sat, half hidden, like they finally understood something they hadn't before. As for me, I still drive the same truck, still work the same job. Only difference is now I get a check every year from a place that once pretended I didn't exist. Funny how that works. But here's the thing I keep thinking about, and I'm curious what you'd do. If you were in my place, would you have opened that valve again? Or would you have left it dry, just to make sure they never forgot? Let me know what you think, because out there, somewhere between what's legal and what's right, there's always a line. And not everyone agrees on where it should be drawn.